All right, welcome back everyone. It's time for an exercise. So you're going to get some practice writing your own components, using props and state, default props, even working with simple click events, having to bind things. There's a lot going on just to make a pretty simple application. So what you're going to build is this right here, a dice rolling app, and it's pretty simple and straightforward, but there's a couple of pieces you may not notice right away. So let me just show it first. We click a button, and the very base functionality is that we have random dice rolls showing up. So yes, these are dice icons or die icons, and I'll show you how to get those in just a moment. But we get different results each time, or we should. So that's straightforward enough. Generate a random number or pick something random from an array. But then to display this as an icon is a little bit more complex, and I'll revisit that. But also notice I click this button, there's a couple of other things that happen. First of all, there's the animation. So those dice animate, and then they stop animating. And then also this button, as I click it, you'll see the text changes to say rolling, and then it stops. So while these are animating, it says rolling, and then afterwards it goes back to roll dice. In addition, this is a little more advanced, and we haven't discussed it. It's one of the further study pieces, the bonus parts. If I click this button, it's actually disabled during the roll. So I can't click it again. I'm clicking here. One more time. I'm going to click like 3 times as loud as I can. Nothing happens because it's disabled. We are temporarily saying you cannot click this button. It's not going to do anything. So simple enough as far as what we're actually creating. But in order to do the animations, in order to do the icon faces, to disable the button, we have to work with quite a few different pieces of state, props, multiple components, some CSS stuff. So let me walk you through the instructions. And like all these exercises, if you don't want to approach it as an exercise, that's totally fine. This is a little bit of a step up, even though it doesn't look like much. In complexity, there's quite a few more pieces that you have to worry about compared to the random number button thing that we did in the last exercise. So if you want to treat this as a code along, that's totally fine as well. Okay, so here's what you're going to do. Of course, make a new React project with create React app. And then we're going to define 2 new components. So we'll have the app component that renders a roll dice component. So this will be the parent component that manages the state of the dice, basically keeping track of what the rolls are. And it will render 2 die components, dice, die, and also a button to roll. So we have one component right here. This is the entire roll dice component, and it renders 2 die components. This is one, that's another. So the die component doesn't have any state. It's not a stateful component. All that it does is it accepts props, and it will use that prop to display the correct face of the die. So the state is going to be managed in the parent that is controlling the 2 die. And so when the state changes, it will re-render these 2 die and pass in new props, in this case 3 or 6 or whatever that value is. So as far as rendering the dice, I said we're going to use icons. Instead of images, we could have had 6 different images, but there's also lots of these great icon libraries out there. This allows us to change colors, for example, which we couldn't do with images. It would be a lot more work. If we wanted to suddenly make them green, we need 6 new green images. But with icons, we can just set it in our CSS. If you're not familiar with Font Awesome, it's a great icon library. All that we do is include the script in order to use these icons. So for example, here's the icon for the 1 die. It looks like this. FAS space FA-dice-1, spelled out, O-N-E, not the number 1. And so if you add an icon with that class, these 2 classes, you will end up with this, although it will usually be pretty small, and then we can update the size using CSS. And you can change the color just like you would change any other text in your CSS. So that's how we'll get those images or those icons. They're not images. What you'll need to do is install Font Awesome, which is really simple. You can just go to this link I've included, find the Font Awesome CDN right here, and include this link inside of your index.html, which is inside the public directory, which we haven't been working in, and just add it to the head tag, just like you're including any other HTML file. And that will give you access to all of those Font Awesome classes anywhere in your components, anywhere in the JSX. And just to reiterate, the classes use the words 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rather than the numerals. Now the way that this all works, again, is that this icon needs to be dynamic. It's going to change the CSS class based off of the prop that is passed in. So if we pass in the prop of 2, TWO, then we need to make an icon in the die component that has the class of fa-dice-2. So your class names are going to be dynamic based off of the prop that's passed in. So you may want to just start there, getting the die component to work. You pass in a prop called, value or number or something, and you make sure it's displaying the correct icon. Then we can move on to the roll dice component. So the roll dice component, as we've already discussed, it manages the state for both of the dice. So we can just assume there's going to be 2 dice in our game. If you want to get real fancy, you can make the roll dice component sort of flexible, so you can pass in a number as a prop. I want to roll 3 dice or 10 dice, and it can use a loop to do that for you. But we're just going to focus on 2. And then there needs to be a roll method, and that roll method is going to be triggered by a click. And when you click on a button, it should call that roll method, which should then randomly get 2 new numbers from 1 to 6. But remember, we don't really care about the numbers. We want the words 1 through 6. And you'll take those 2 new numbers, you'll update the state, which will then cause the dice to re-render with the new values. So those values, as I just said they need to be text, not numbers. So just keep that in mind. Now moving on to the more challenging stuff, animations, for example. If you want to add animations, the way that I've done it is use a class, so a CSS class where the animation is defined. You can find all sorts of cool examples online, much fancier than this little jiggle animation, much more realistic ones if you want to find them. And all that we do is keep track of, in the state of the roll dice component, whether the dice are currently rolling or not. So we have a value called is rolling or is active or is animating, something like that. And then we basically use a timer to remove that class after 1 second. So we would append it when you click on that button. Then as soon as 1 second has elapsed, we update the state to say that it's no longer rolling, which means that our class, it will be removed. So it's a little more complicated. So I'm going to do that again as a tutorial, as a separate video towards the end of this section. And then finally, if you want to change the button text, that's not terribly difficult to change the text while it's rolling. But notice it's in sync with this animation. So that same piece of the state, whether it's called is rolling or is active or something like that, should control the text that is showing up here. And that's just a simple conditional. Is this rolling? Or is this.state.rolling? If it is, display rolling. Otherwise, display roll dice. Now, to disable the button is a little trickier, and I'm going to leave that as a bonus. I'll show you how to do it at the end, but we haven't discussed the way of disabling a button inside of JSX. It's not very difficult at all, but you might want to search around to find it. And of course, I'll show you how to do it at the end. All right, so there's a lot here. I recommend, again, that you start after you create your new React app, make the dice component or the die component first, and make sure you can get them to display the correct faces based off of props. Give it a shot, and I'll have the first part of the solution in the next video, and it will probably be 2 or 3 videos. All right, see you then.